As the French Civil War that followed the Revolution of 1920 drew to a bloody conclusion, the French Republic, teetering on the brink of collapse, chose exile over surrender. With limited options, the government and military high command decided to retreat from the mainland. Utilising the French Navy, they executed a strategic withdrawal across the Mediterranean to French Algeria, which remained under their control. In Algiers, a bulk of the French establishment, along with loyalist military forces and government officials, regrouped to form a government in exile, clinging to the remnants of their authority in the overseas département. Initially, the exiled government believed that the revolutionary state taking shape on mainland France would soon collapse under its own weight. Instead, they watched with dismay as the revolutionaries solidified their power and formally proclaimed the Federation of the Commune of France. In a bitter twist of fate, the exiles pinned their hopes on the German Empire to suppress the new regime. However, Germany instead signed a peace treaty with the revolutionary government, recognizing it as the legitimate successor to the French Republic, with little regard for the exiled administration. The government in Algiers issued strong protests, but their efforts were in vain, as the rest of the German-aligned world quickly followed suit, granting recognition to the Commune. In contrast, the Entente and its allies firmly recognized the exiled government as the legitimate authority of France. Refusing to be cowed, the exiles reaffirmed their claim to represent France and its empire. They pledged to honour their commitments to the Entente alliance and vowed to reclaim the mainland, no matter the cost. Overall, the exiled government retained control over North and West Africa, which now served as its de facto mainland. It also maintained authority over several overseas départements, including the strategically vital island of Corsica. While the exiles officially upheld the name French Republic to assert their claim as the legitimate government of France, they were colloquially referred to as National France by much of the world. In countries within the German sphere, where the exiled state was held in low regard, it was often derisively called Sand France in casual conversation. The government vowed to be a direct continuation of the previous mainland regime, maintaining its democratic principles and pledging to honour the Republic's constitution. However, this commitment placed them in a precarious position. The government was widely discredited, particularly among the military and nationalist factions, who blamed it for France's defeat in the Great War and the eventual fall of the nation. Some even went so far as to hold democracy itself responsible, arguing that only an uncompromising leader could have saved France from its darkest hour. The exiles, along with the Pieds Noirs, white French settlers already established in Algeria, formed a significant portion of the population, and in some major cities they even constituted a majority. However, overall, the European population remained a small minority, ruling over millions of native Algerians and other Africans. To maintain control, the government relied heavily on the army, using it to enforce colonial rule and suppress native resistance. In the early years, the military was stretched thin, struggling to quash uprisings and maintain order across West and North Africa. By early 1922, the government had established a tenuous grip on its territories. While the colonial situation remained precarious, the native populations had largely come to tolerate the new administration, accepting that it was here to stay. Although the region was far from stable, unrest and resentment still simmered. The army's presence was scaled back and redeployed, while rule from Algiers was increasingly enforced by native elites loyal to the colonial government. The democratic administration faced constant challenges, descending into petty infighting and becoming increasingly perceived as incompetent by the exiles. This instability fueled real fears that the colonial regime could collapse entirely. In 1926, Marshal Philippe Pétain, a revered hero of the Great War known as the Lion of Verdun, decided that the situation could no longer be tolerated. With the backing of the army, particularly Great War veterans, he led a coup against the government. Rather than outright overthrowing the democratic regime, Pétain pressured Parliament to elect him as acting president and declared a state of emergency. As the chief of the French military, Pétain faced little resistance and quickly consolidated absolute control over the nation. The majority of the army openly supported his leadership, and news of his presidency was even met with cheers in certain parts of the country. Pétain effectively re-established a thinly veiled junta, though he refrained from formally annulling or amending the constitution. As a result, the Republic and its institutions technically remained intact on paper. The government allowed political parties to operate and attend Parliament, creating the illusion of democracy. In reality, however, Parliament merely served as a rubber stamp for the Marshal's decisions. Pétain addressed the nation and reaffirmed the Republic's mission to liberate the mainland. If a beaten country is divided against itself, it dies. If a beaten country can unite, it is reborn. Vive la France! Pétain believed that only strong authoritarian rule could save France, and he saw a powerful, morally guided, military-led government as the nation's best hope for reclaiming the homeland. While his early rule focused on stabilizing and consolidating control over the colonies, his administration quickly shifted its efforts toward preparing for war against the Commune of France. A significant portion of the national budget was allocated to the military to achieve this goal, with much of the nation's industry reshifting to be devoted almost entirely to supporting the needs of the armed forces. Pétain and his key advisors, largely composed of Great War veterans, believed that failing to reclaim the mainland would lead to an existential crisis. Without access to the resources of France itself, they feared French Africa would inevitably crumble under the weight of time and rebellion. In a candid moment with his ministers, Pétain remarked, "There is a key difference between us and the English exiles. The English exiles live in a stable, secure land in the New World. We, however, face revolt, hostility, and fury from those beneath us. For us, it is not just survival. It is a matter of life and death." The sentiment reflected the harsh reality of French rule in Africa. For the native populations, life under French governance was oppressive. Although millions were technically considered French citizens, they lived under the indigenous system, which relegated them to second-class status. Subjected to collective punishment, a parallel and often unjust legal system, heavy taxation, forced labour, and widespread mistreatment, they were regarded as inferior by the French colonists. While some voices within Parliament advocated for improving their conditions, these proposals gained little traction. The administration's reliance on native labour, deemed essential for preparing the reconquest of France, ensured that the oppressive system remained firmly in place. To enforce its control, the government relied heavily on native elites loyal to the French state, who acted as intermediaries to maintain order in their communities. At the same time, a growing class of French-educated natives began to emerge, shaped by a government-designed education system that emphasized Frenchness and loyalty to the colonial regime. This generation, along with native war veterans, often desired reform, but largely remained faithful to the state and was prepared to fight for it. While Pétain's government was widely accepted and the Democratic parties temporarily sidelined, various ideological factions continued to advocate within the nation. Republicans, Democrats, nationalists, reactionaries, and monarchists all vied for influence. Among these, the Royalist movement gained significant traction. For many, the perceived collapse of the Third Republic, despite the exiled state retaining its name, underscored the belief that only a restored monarchy could save France. The Royalist movement coalesced around the Parti Action Française, which championed the restoration of the Bourbon-Orléans dynasty. Although the party abstained from participating in elections, it built a vast network of influence among radicalized Catholics and intellectuals. The movement's philosophy was encapsulated by its leader, Charles Maurras, who famously declared, "To love France today, one must hate what she has become." Deeply anti-parliamentary, the AF sought to dismantle the republican system and reinstate a Catholic, integralist, absolute monarchy. They supported Prince Jean, Duke of Guise, the current head of the House of Orléans. However, under the republican law of exile, all male members of France's former royal houses were barred from residing on French soil, forcing the Duke to live abroad. Witnessing the chaos that had befallen his country, Jean reached out to the AF and, in 1933, issued a manifesto calling for a royal government in place of one led by voiceless parties, a direct challenge to Pétain's administration. Another contender for the throne was Louis, Prince Napoleon, the pretender to the imperial throne and head of the House of Bonaparte. While his claim lacked the widespread support enjoyed by Prince Jean, largely due to the disastrous reign of Napoleon III, the prince nonetheless openly expressed his desire to serve in the French army and play a role in the liberation of the mainland. As the Republic entered the 1930s, the government increasingly prioritized preparations for a future war with the Commune of France, often at the expense of addressing domestic issues. This neglect led to mismanagement in parts of the country, fueling unrest among the native populations in West Africa. Within the military, disagreements arose over the future direction of its doctrines. Despite this, efforts were focused on ensuring the army would be fully combat ready by 1938. The military structure at that time consisted of a relatively small corps of professional soldiers, including French regulars of the colonial army, native regiments, and the Foreign Legion, supplemented by a large conscripted force. Additionally, a new branch of the French Marines was established, modelled on the rigorous training of the newly formed Royal Canadian Marines, and specifically designed to prepare for amphibious assaults along the southern coast of France. However, a growing divide emerged within the ranks of the military. Younger, rising officers argued that significant reforms were urgently needed, criticising Pétain and his ageing military staff for their reliance on outdated Great War tactics. This lack of innovation, they warned, left the army ill-prepared for the realities of modern warfare. Two men emerged as the leaders of two competing schools of thought on military reform, each with their own distinctive nickname, the Bear and the Rooster. Henry Morduch, known as the Bear, was an infantry general who rose rapidly through the ranks during the Great War, earning a reputation for sheer bravery and exceptional command ability. While close to Pétain, Morduch was a critic of the military establishment. He argued that France's defeat stemmed from a lack of experienced officers and an out-of-touch high command. To address this, he advocated for bold reforms, including the mandatory retirement of all officers over the age of 56 and the complete restructuring of the armed forces by merging all branches, effectively rebuilding the military from the ground up. The other figure was Charles de Gaulle, known as the Rooster, who was a lieutenant colonel. A fellow veteran of the Great War, de Gaulle had distinguished himself leading troops at Verdun before being captured, later escaping captivity and returning to the fight. Ambitious and highly regarded, he became both a protégé of Pétain and a renowned military theorist. While he shared some of Mordauc's views on France's defeat, de Gaulle favoured a different approach. Rather than wholesale reorganisation, he emphasised the need for greater cooperation across branches, advocating for expanded use of armoured units supported by air power. He also championed greater autonomy for officers and the creation of an additional corps of professional soldiers to complement the existing forces. Both men sought to influence military opinion and sway Pétain himself by publishing books outlining their reform proposals in 1936, positioning themselves as potential future leaders of the nation. Mordauc, who was already serving as Ministry of the Interior in Pétain's cabinet, grew increasingly disillusioned with the Marshal's disregard for even the pretense of democracy. In contrast, de Gaulle, though maintaining a close relationship with Pétain, held fundamentally different views. A staunch monarchist aligned with Action Française, de Gaulle believed that France's true revival could only come through the restoration of the monarchy. Tensions between the native populations and colonial authorities continued to simmer throughout the late 1920s and early 1930s. The government was forced repeatedly to assert its authority, suppressing uprisings and responding to sporadic clashes with Tuareg tribesmen who were pillaging villages in Niger. Meanwhile, communard agents were believed to be operating within the country, stoking dissent, while pan-Arab supporters spread propaganda against the regime. In the autumn of 1935, administrative mismanagement in French Sudan resulted in a poor harvest, triggering widespread food shortages and famine across the region. The ensuing hardship fueled significant unrest among the local African population, culminating in a large-scale revolt against French rule. The regime's response was sluggish, hampered by poor communication and coordination, leaving the colonial garrison unprepared to effectively contain the uprising. Although the revolt was largely unorganized, the sheer numbers of African rebels overwhelmed the local garrison, forcing it to retreat in disarray. Once the extent of the uprising became clear in Algiers, the government ordered the full suppression of the rebellion. This involved mobilizing the ground army to restore order and allocating additional reserves to reinforce the effort. Marshal Franchet d'Espery, Pétain's trusted deputy and vice president of the Superior War Council, was tasked with overseeing the suppression of the revolt. Upon linking up with the Sudan garrison, the ground army, under the command of General Maurice Brissot, regrouped and unleashed a relentless artillery campaign against the rebels. While effective, the bombardment inadvertently destroyed parts of the infrastructure the French had painstakingly built in the region. Brissot pursued a ruthless approach to swiftly end the rebellion. The heavy shelling shattered the morale of the tribes, forcing many to retreat in disarray. Capitalizing on this, Brissot ordered his forces to pursue and divide the scattered rebels. Meanwhile, d'Espery engaged with tribal leaders, leveraging their influence to pressure their tribesmen into surrendering and restoring order. The revolt was ultimately suppressed, and colonial rule was maintained. However, the uprising left a lasting impact, deepening tensions between the native population and the French authorities across the region. For many French exiles, the unrest served as a wake-up call, shattering any sense of complacency they had developed while living in exile. It underscored the unsustainability of their position in the colonies and reinforced the belief that a war with the Commune was not only inevitable, but essential for their survival. By 1936, trust in Pétain was waning. Civilian support for his regime was declining, and even within the army, the backbone of his rule, confidence in the Marshal was eroding. Pétain's favoritism towards his protégés had placed them in many key positions. While these individuals were undoubtedly competent, this practice left other qualified officers sidelined, fostering resentment. Critics worried that such favoritism risked encouraging doctrinal rot and that Pétain was surrounding himself with sycophants. Amid this growing discontent, some within the Marshal's inner circle openly criticised the state of affairs. Notably, General Henri Modac emerged as a vocal opponent, rallying a faction of liberal-minded military officers around him. Modac's movement evolved into a significant power bloc, supporting democratic principles. That same year, the British King George V died in exile, and Pétain attended the funeral in Canada. Death deeply affected the aging Marshal, who had considered the king a personal friend. Pétain saw a striking parallel between himself and the king, realizing that he too might die in exile, never to see his homeland again. It is believed that this moment marked a turning point for Pétain, as he understood that the struggle to reclaim their homeland would likely fall to the next generation. The Marshal knew that his two clear choices for a successor were General Modac or General de Gaulle. When Marshal d'Esperey, Pétain's key ally, retired a few months later, the Marshal made his decision and appointed General Modac as his successor. This was seen as a clear sign that Pétain was endorsing Modac over de Gaulle in the eyes of the nation. Later, in March 1936, early one morning, the Lion of Verdun announced his immediate resignation and retirement, citing old age as the reason. In his final words, he invoked the iconic order that he had given at the Battle of Verdun. "Courage, be strong, we'll get 'em." As he departed, crowds gathered to cheer him, and any lingering discontent with his leadership evaporated. The people hailed him as the true hero of France, and his departure was met with widespread affection and respect. Following the Marshal's resignation, the Parliament invoked Article 7 of the Constitution, and both chambers convened to elect a new president. The only name put forward was that of General Modac, who was elected unanimously. Upon taking office, he promised to lead the nation to victory, retake the mainland, and implement the military reforms he had long advocated. While Modac sought to focus on these goals, his position of power was far from secure. General de Gaulle, whose ambitions to lead had not waned, remained a formidable rival. After being sidelined by Pétain in favour of Modac, de Gaulle had grown closer to the monarchist movement and was now openly aligned with it. His obsession with restoring France convinced him that drastic measures were needed, including ending the Republic itself, to save the nation. While both men schemed against one another, the inevitable was approaching. The Second Weltkrieg loomed, and only one man could lead France. Modac and de Gaulle were on a collision course, destined for a confrontation that would determine what kind of exiled France would fight for the soul of the mainland. Would it be a kingdom or a republic?
Love your country? Then subscribe! Happy holidays!